Hello, hello. Welcome to Hear Her Sports. I'm host and producer Elizabeth Emery. Once again, I have a wonderful female athlete to introduce this week. With me here is Jen Gurecki, CEO of Coalition Snow, a woman-founded ski and snowboard company. Jen is a self-described workaholic, so is involved in a whole bunch of other big projects, including creating the excellent new print magazine, Sisu. But I was especially excited to get Jen on the show to find out more about selling quality women's equipment versus pinking down something designed and made for by men. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, you have heard me talk about my quest for wide cycling shoes, and I mention it again in this episode. It's interesting, this time it struck me while editing that my feet aren't really that small, and yet I'm nearly apologizing for needing something special. My feet are 7.5, small for a man, of course, but pretty average for a woman. So stay tuned to hear from Jen about why she started Coalition and the impact of providing excellent gear for sporty women right from the get-go. Jen and I also talked about being kind, speaking up, and dealing with making mistakes. Jen was amazing to work with getting the show together, and I love her generous spirit of supporting other women. So thank you to her, and let's get started. Well, I'm so excited to have you here, so welcome, and I'm expecting a lively chat, so I had my coffee.
Oh, good. You might have also needed to have a little bit of bourbon, but that's okay.
Oh, well, a little bit later.
Yeah.
Could you start by introducing yourself? Because you do so many things, so I'm excited to hear how you describe yourself.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So my name's Jen Gurecki. I am the CEO of Coalition Snow. We are a women-founded ski and snowboard company. I'm also the editor-in-chief of Sisu Magazine, which is a quarterly print magazine whose mission is to uncover the untold stories of the outdoors. In my spare time, I have a podcast called Juicy Bits that I record with my friend Jillian. And I also have a business in Kenya called Zawadisha that is also another spare time operation because I have an entire team of Kenyan women who operate it. And then I love to cycle and snowboard and carb load and drink bourbon and wine.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's me.
Excellent. And you know, because you started with all those business things, I'm going to jump to my business questions. And one of my first, and I think pretty obvious questions is, how are you balancing all of those things?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. Obviously there's teams behind everything. So as I mentioned, the business that I have in Kenya, I'm not responsible for the day-to-day operations. So it's something that I founded and it's something that I still support, but there's a team of Kenyan women who run it. Just as with Coalition and with Sisu, I'm working with my work wife, Lauren Bello-Okerman. So there's other people involved. So that's an important thing to note. I also would definitely consider myself a workaholic. I love my work. I get to, like, a lot of my leisure time and my activity time is actually wrapped up into my work because I work in the outdoor industry. So it's not crazy for me to be cycling and also be on a phone call or be on a chairlift and be having a meeting. And so I'm pretty fortunate in the sense that a lot of things that people do on the weekends or do away from work is actually part of my work. And I think that helps to balance things out a little bit. And then honestly, I've made purposeful life decisions. Like, I'm child free. I don't have children. And that, frees up an incredible amount of time each day that I get to dedicate toward other things. And so I think, both the decisions I've made in my life and then also, the industries that I'm in and these teams help me to be able to do quite a bit.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is being busy, sort of just filling your time with, I don't know, like answering emails and crap like that versus getting actually really good work done. Are you good at balancing that kind of stuff?
I am. I'll tell you, most people wait for at least 2 weeks to get an email response from me. So I'll scan an email. And if it's not timely, I move on to things that actually need to get done. And I keep a running list and I prioritize every day what needs to get done and then what can get bumped. So I would say I'm very highly organized, and I'm hyper aware of how to prioritize, and I carve out time every day for like, this is the amount of time, like I'm going to put time aside to focus on sales. I'm going to put time aside to, I will put maybe an hour aside to spend on emails, but I don't keep email open all day. I don't let that distract me. I don't receive notifications on my phone for anything. And I will spend time like really honing in on what projects need to get done.
Right, that's good. I'm less good at that, I got to say.
Mm.
What's been difficult in your business life?
Well, I think for so many small business owners, or people who are launching any sort of new venture, probably the most difficult thing is cash flow. Like literally manage, like working on your financials day in and day out, and understanding not only what your cash flow is currently, because that's pretty easy when you just look at the bank, but also projecting that out over time, and the amount of stress that causes me is pretty significant. And it's, for us, it's a little bit unique in the ski and snowboard world and snow sports, because when you're on the product side of things, specifically on the hard goods side, now is the time of year. So, today's April 11th, and now's the time of year where we're placing a really significant order with our manufacturer, and we are going to wire an incredible amount of money, but we won't be able to realize any sales from that until October. And that is challenging. And so having this seasonal snow sports hard goods business that's so capital intensive, and you have a sales cycle that really is about 3 to 4 months of the year, that's hard.
Right,
hard.
right. And you don't have a summer line of any kind, so there's nothing to make up for it.
Yeah, I mean, really, the magazine is definitely the main thing that we have going on in the summer, and it helps to mitigate it a little bit. And then we do have some apparel and accessories that we sell, but it's a very different scale when you think about, how many magazines or how many t-shirts do you have to sell versus like when you're making one sale of a pair of skis. It's just a fundamentally different model and scale, and yeah.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot I want to talk about, because I think your magazine, I just recently finished reading the second issue. It's really terrific. It's so good. It's fun and it's serious, but it also has some really deep stuff in it, but is also manageable. I think that's exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what we were going for, so it's good to hear.
Well, good. So let's get to skis, because one of the real reasons I wanted to talk to you was you're making women-specific equipment. So let's talk about the reasoning behind making women's goods, women's gear, women's equipment, clothing. Like, why did you start Coalition?
Well, we've all been skiing and snowboarding for more than 20 years and have understood that the offerings available to women were subpar. Women do not have the same choices when it comes to their equipment as men do. So you have to look harder, search more, be more discerning when it comes to finding something that would really suit you. And for so long, the standard approach to designing women's equipment was this shrink it and pink it mentality. So you take a men's product, you shrink it, you soften it, you put pink graphics on it, and voila, you have a woman's product. Well, it actually doesn't work. Women need something that's actually as robust as men. And while there's an argument for unisex equipment, because really at the end of the day, you should be on something that suits your skier ability, your preferences of terrain, your height, your weight, like that's really what should go into determining like what ski you would be on. But there's so much more than just being on a plank of wood, right? Like there's this whole, like the whole social mission and the whole social side to it of, we have an industry that it has historically been run by men. And it's men who own the companies and men who design the skis and men who market. And so, not only feeling that we believe women deserve the very best equipment, just as good as what men get, we also saw this as an opportunity to really push the boundaries in an industry and carve out leadership and executive positions for women in an industry that has traditionally marginalized us. So there was definitely the equipment side, but then also the social impact side of it. And, you know, it was when looking at wanting to start coalition, there was definitely a void in the market. So that from a business standpoint, like you find a problem and you solve for it. And that's exactly what we did. And we were able to solve for it both on sort of like a technical side as being women and only investing in women's products and investing 100% of our resources into creating products for people like us, and then also understanding the greater societal implications for the work that we're doing.
So I'm a cyclist, and we have the shrink it and pink it problem also.
Yeah.
And I think about shoes a lot because I have very small feet, but I have very wide feet, and it's really hard. And I've heard other women talk about it's really hard to find good, high quality shoes. But I was doing research to talk to you, and a guy I know who sells skis, he's a rep, said, women don't spend as much money on equipment. And it twinged me because I'm not sure I believe that. And I just wanted to hear what your thought about that was.
I would probably have to agree with him. I would probably have to agree with him. So, and this goes into like why we think why we believe in our company and what it is we're putting out there. Women don't spend as much on equipment because they don't believe they deserve it. And so you obviously have what I would call like core, like a core user, whether that be in cycling or skiing, of women who absolutely want the very best, and they will, buy the exact right tool for the job. They will do that. But women a lot of times just think like, oh, I shouldn't be spending that money on myself, or I don't need to have the very best. I can do with less. I can do without. Just sort of like typical like woman bullshit that we do to ourselves. We're like, we don't actually think that we deserve anything good.
Right.
And then I think that the other part of it as well is that women in particular have gotten really focused on this idea of any sort of leisure should be fitness based. And so when we look at our incredibly demanding lives and how much time do we actually have to like carve out in any given day or any given week to recreate, if we're not equating that with also losing weight or being fit and all that other, things that society tells us that we should be doing, that's where I think women end up spending some of their money. So they'll have the membership at the gym, but they're not going to buy the pair of skis. And I think that there's this idea of like, when do we just get to have fun? When do we get to be outside and recreate because it's fun and it soothes the soul, and it's not necessarily about having flat abs and a tight ass. And then also like, when do we tell ourselves that we do deserve nice things?
But I also wonder, like you were talking about how your skis are made for more advanced skiers, and there weren't those kind of skis available to women in the past. So somebody going to buy skis, a woman going to buy skis, might not think that it's worth spending the extra money because there's nothing there that fits her bill. Or she's tried something that's been marketed as a good ski, but it's really not. So she doesn't know the joy of being on really incredible equipment.
Right. So, but we don't make skis for advanced skiers. We do, but we don't only make skis for advanced skiers. We actually make skis for skiers. We make snowboards for snowboarders. You don't have to be advanced or expert to be on our equipment. You don't have to be advanced or expert to demand to have something that's exceptional, right? So, if you are a beginner or an intermediate, why would you have something that doesn't help you progress in the sport?
Right.
And that's what so much of women's equipment is, because it's shortened and softened and pinked down. You actually have a tool that will not help you evolve. Like, you will not become a better skier if you're on something that's short and soft. It's actually your gear is holding you back. So when we came into to the marketplace, what we said was that like all women deserve the very best, and you deserve something that's going to help you advance in the sport and that's going to support you in having fun. And those short, soft pink sticks that are going to chatter and make you feel totally out of control and never allow you to even progress, like you're going to lack the confidence and you're going to not have fun. And so while we do make equipment, like we have skis that, in a 180 length that are definitely for expert skiers, we also have skis that are in a 157 that are really designed for people who are maybe getting into the sport. But I think that it doesn't matter if you're an expert or not. If there's something that you love and there's something that you want to be good at, like you should have. I just always go back to this notion: you should have the right tool for the job.
Right. I wonder too if people or women are quitting because they're not enjoying it because they're not on the right equipment for the job.
Oh, for sure. Like if you end up on a shitty pair of skis and you feel out of control, why would you ever go do it again?
Right.
You wouldn't. Right. Because that's the thing. Like we actually, like we don't need to suffer more. like sign me up for that experience that's going to make me feel awful about myself. No thanks. But that's what happens when you're on like ill-fitting gear, right?
Right, and everyone else is having fun.
Right. And then you just feel like a jerk. Yeah.
But okay, so let's talk about some of the sort of the reality of selling these skis, because you've recently been writing about how after 5 years there are very few or not even one outdoor shop, independent shop in the country that carries you.
That's correct, yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. How much time do we have here? So, okay, so just from a business perspective, independent, small, specialty retail stores. I'm not talking about like REI or Evo or Beck. I'm talking about like the independently owned, smaller local shops. They're very risk adverse. And they're risk adverse from a business perspective because they don't have a lot of extra capital. And so to purchase inventory that may not sell is going to be difficult for them, right? So from a business standpoint, they are likely going to go with the brands that everybody knows about and that they don't really have to work that hard to sell. The challenge in that is that you are just perpetuating the good old boys club, right? Your sales reps who are men don't have to learn about women specific, or they don't have to learn about the newer companies that are emerging that are female founded. They don't have to educate themselves on the evolution of the sport or what's happening in society. They can just status quo the shit out of it. So that's where like you understand like, okay, well, you may not be making a gendered decision and that you're not discriminating against us as women because you're not carrying our skis, but all the other layers that go into it are actually because you aren't actually committed to supporting female-founded companies because you're not going to put the time in to educate yourselves, to understand how this equipment might be different than what you already offer. Your sales team doesn't have the language to even be able to communicate to their customers. And so that's definitely like, that's part of the issue. I would say also like for us in particular, we have scared cisgendered white men. They are a little bit afraid of us, just because we show up in the world in a really bold way and apologetically, and that intimidates men. And we all know that when you intimidate men, they are not, and not all of them. Like there's definitely some fantastic co-conspirators out there who see our company and are like, oh my, like we want to work with you. You're incredible. And there are men who support us in very different ways. But when you intimidate men, that's, another reason for them to be like, I'm not sure if I want to go down this road. But for us to change means that we would then have to fit inside the box of what it's, what society has told us women are supposed to say and do and act like. And honestly, if we were designing clothing, everybody would be buying us because we'd be in our lane.
Right.
but we make hard goods and women don't make hard goods. So we're not staying in our lane. And that fundamentally rubs people, whether consciously or subconsciously. That becomes another barrier. And so those, I think those are a lot of the reasons. And then finally, from just sort of once again like a non-gendered perspective, because we haven't had access, like we literally don't hold the keys. We've had to carve out our own space. And this is where like e-commerce has been wonderful for us, and Instagram and these like really sort of democratic open spaces where you just like literally sign up and pay the same as everyone else, and like you have a storefront, right? But because we're e-commerce, well, now we're competing with a brick and mortar shop. And so this is where sort of like the retail side of things, if you sell direct to the customer, these specialty stores don't necessarily want to carry you because they're in competition. But then at the same time, there's this lack of recognition. Well, we have to sell direct because none of you will sell us. Like it's like the catch-22. Whereas other, a lot of the more established ski companies who existed prior to e-commerce, because this is all relatively new, they were in the queue a long time ago. And so they have those relationships and they've been working with the same reps for 20 years and they don't sell direct because they've never had to. And so we've really been forced into, figuring out how to run a business in a male-dominated industry where we don't hold the keys. And for all the various reasons, that's been a challenge.
Yeah. And, just from the consumer standpoint, and I'm going back to my silly shoe example, for me, one reason it's so hard to find shoes that fit is because no one carries my size. So, we can order it for you, but what good is that? Because I have to commit to the shoe that I don't even know if it's going to fit. And so,
right.
Yeah, you do need that person in the store who's going to totally, fully support you and have everything right there, which is going to be hard to find, I would think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, this brings up a thing I've been thinking about a lot is, equity in the outdoors is really sort of a hot topic right now. But, on one hand, I'm really sad that we have to talk about this, I mean, I love that there's women's groups, there's women's races, groups for women, groups for people of color. But why are we still having to talk about this? But I'm glad that it's there.
I mean, because society's slow to change and people are racist and sexist and all the other things. I mean, that's what people are biased and people have implicit bias and explicit bias. And like, we just live in a world where we're not equal. That's, why we have to, like, we're still not there yet. I mean, here's a perfect example. So for as far as people think that women have come, just a few weeks ago, I was at a summit and I was speaking. I was having sort of like a fireside chat with a woman of color, and we were talking about accessibility and access to the outdoors, and we're having this conversation, and we were even getting into sort of like hiring practices and things like that. And a cisgendered white man says like, oh, there's this one company in Colorado that I love so much because the CEO, for you to get a job, you have to go summit a 14,000 foot peak. You have to go summit a 14er with him. And I said, well, I can understand how that would allow you to understand someone's grit and their perseverance and their ability to overcome obstacles. But not everybody can summit a 14,000 foot peak. Now, in my mind, I was referring to people who aren't able-bodied, right? I wasn't referring to any sort of gender, but that's how I left it. After this session, he comes up to me and says, oh, I wasn't, I know that women can do things. I wasn't saying that women couldn't summit a mountain. And then I just looked at him and said, oh, babe, I wasn't talking about women. Of course, women can summit mountains, likely better than you. I was talking about people who aren't able-bodied. So when you have a hiring practice that is discriminatory based on whether or not you have the physical ability to summit a peak, we have a problem. And the fact that you think that this was only talking about gender because I'm a woman, we have a deeper problem there. And then he apologized for being like an engineer and not knowing how to speak about things. And that just happened. So like, here's this person thinking that they're like contributing positively to a conversation, but they're so unaware of what it means to have a body that allows you to summit a peak, but then also immediately goes into like thinking that like women aren't able to do things. And this just happened. And that's why we still need to create safe spaces for women and people of color and any other group, because at the end of the day, we just don't have time for those conversations. And we need to be surrounded by people who understand us and support us. And building those communities of support, these safe spaces, are fundamentally important, because not having them, it's just not necessarily safe for us, like emotionally safe, physically safe. And that's why we still have to have these.
Do you see any changes in younger people? Like really young? Because I know you're making skis now for girls.
Yeah, I mean, I would say when I kind of look at like society at large or what's happening, I think that younger generations are definitely perceiving gender in a very different way, and even sexuality, and looking at how everything's more on a spectrum.
Yeah, for sure.
I see that being really different, but those aren't the people who are, running corporations and creating policy and controlling our media. So, once a bunch of people die off, yeah, I think that we'll start seeing change. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as long as you said, a really wide variety of people start getting into power and being able to make those decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what other big issues are you seeing and hearing these days in the outdoor world? Sort of bigger picture ideas.
Yeah, well, I think inclusivity is a really big issue, like above and beyond gender. Like to only focus on gender sort of lacks the intersectionality around all the various issues that affect the way that people get to exist in this world. So in the outdoors in particular, we're seeing a lot of really important and robust conversations around race, around access, around gender identity and sexuality, and really sort of understanding that people who recreate in the outdoors are multifaceted and multidimensional, and this sort of singular narrative that's been presented in terms of what does it look like or what does it mean to be somebody who loves the outdoors, that normalcy is being challenged, and there's a lot of really good conversations happening around that.
And you just had a trip with Evo.
Mm-hmm.
And you had some discussions with the women that were on the trip. What did they want to talk about?
Well, I'll tell you. So we actually had one person reach out who said, I'm a trans woman and I don't know if I'm welcome to come on this trip. Is this a safe space for me to come? And so, I personally, without even talking to Evo, I was like, yes, come. Like, yes. And then, ended up speaking to Evo, and we were all on the same page of like, well, we made a miss by marketing it as a women's trip. We actually should have said, like, we welcome women, trans, and non-binary in individuals on this trip. And so that was a conversation that was happening even before the trip started. And then when we were on the trip, that definitely came up because the cisgendered women were really curious about this person's experience as being a trans woman. We talked about lots of other things too, but that was a really productive conversation. But yeah, that was I'd say it was like one of the highlights for me was being able to even have an experience in which we could have these conversations and have it with somebody who is living that experience rather than talking about them.
How did it come about that it was such an open, honest space for everybody to talk?
I think we were lucky because we were definitely like very nervous going in, but some of the things that we did. So prior to the trip starting, I asked for a code of conduct to be created that everybody would have to sign the code of conduct, and it was a zero tolerance policy that if you violated the contract, you would just be asked to leave. So everybody had to sign the code of conduct, which I think set the terms for what we were expecting. And then when we all got together, we went over that again in terms of like, these are our expectations for what's going to happen on the trip. And then we just had lovely people. I mean, they're just like lovely human beings who were there who, just I think that they took the code of conduct seriously. They were respectful, and they just enjoyed one another's company. But we definitely did some work on the front end to create the expectation of what would be tolerated and not tolerated on this trip.
You talked about when the transgender person originally contacted you, you said, oh, we should have labeled the trip as sort of broader than you did. Are you comfortable when you make those mistakes, and do you label them as mistakes? And, I think that's one thing that, is hard in these days of, learning to reframe things, is being comfortable with sort of goofing.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's comfortable. Like, it sucks when you realize that you failed. Like, no one likes to feel like, oh, I just like really fucked up, right? And so I can't say that it feels good, but I'm also able to say like, oh wow, we failed on that. That was a miss. And I immediately acknowledged it to this person and apologized. I said, I'm really sorry. I understand why you're asking us this question, because we weren't explicit about it. And we should have been explicit, because our values are that, yes, you're absolutely welcome, and we would hold a safe space for you. And then that's when I, immediately went to Evo and said, like, we absolutely must have a code of conduct. We must hold a safe space. And they were 100% into it. So it was a very easy process. And even when we were talking about future trips, we said, like, we must change the language. So I wouldn't say that it's like comfortable in the sense that nobody likes to feel like you did something that hurt another person, or that you didn't do your job as well as you could have done it, or that you're contributing to sort of reinforcing stereotypes that aren't in line with your values. Like, none of those things particularly feel good. But the right thing to do is just resolve it. And so that's like, I feel like I'm able, like, I'm willing to do that. And I'm fortunate to work with people who are also able to do that. I think the worst possible thing would be, to be defensive about it rather than just own the mistake.
Right. I think that's a criticism of a lot of mistakes, is the defensiveness. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I really like about you is you're so outspoken and, willing to, say whatever. How did you get there?
My parents are New Yorkers. I don't know. I definitely think that's part of it, because I'll tell you, like, East Coasters and like, older generation East Coasters, like, they're not necessarily politically correct. They don't go into conversations needing to be liked. So I think that, like, just being raised in a home like that, where, like, clearly, like, the F word was tossed around like it was no big deal. So that's part of it. I think also, I don't exist in this world to make other people feel comfortable. Like, that's not my job. And it's also not my job to be nice. You should always be kind. And being kind means that you actually say things that are very uncomfortable. And you might say things that don't make that other people may not like you for them. So I've just made a decision that I don't need to exist with people liking me, that's not important. And there's plenty of people who do like me, but I don't navigate conversations or navigate podcasts or interviews going into it of like, oh, I hope people really like me, because that's just playing it safe. And then you don't actually ever get to talk about anything real. And I just kind of have this guiding light of like, be kind. But being kind means that you definitely are going to make people angry, or they may not appreciate what it is you have to say, because it means that you have to be like, kind of like, speak the truth. And sometimes the truth really hurts, particularly when you're talking about sort of undoing like the wrongs of this world, or like looking at life through a social justice perspective. When you start challenging norms, start challenging people who hold power, that's always tricky. And I guess I don't care what people think. And by people, I mean like people who aren't important to me. Like, there's obviously people in my life who I care how they perceive me, and those are like people who are really close to me. But just sort of like people who aren't in your life, like, why do you care? Like, why would you care?
Well, I mean, one thing that people have said about women is that they aren't really great at accepting criticism or scrutiny, always being looked at and judged and stuff like that. And so you definitely have to deal with that if you're speaking out loud.
Exactly. I should, like, you want to see some screenshots of the messages that I get or like things that happen. I mean, you definitely can't exist in the world the way that I do and not be criticized, but also you can't exist in the world in general without being criticized. So do you just go through life playing it safe, trying to have people like you and avoid criticism, or do you just like show up who you are, like show up as how you are and have a strong set of values that guide you?
And you have a pretty big social media presence.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been good at navigating that and making it how you want it?
I do. Yeah, I think that we've been really good at, I would say, like staying on brand and like making sure that like we're putting things out there that feel really true to us. As with everything, there's a million more things that I would like to do, and we don't do them. One of my challenges, for example, with the Instagram in particular for Coalition is that it's a heavily snow sports influenced account, right? So like we make skis and snowboards. We're posting a lot of people who are skiing and snowboarding, and our ability to find photos and to find content that represents diversity is really hard. It's really difficult. So we got a lot of white women on our page, and I'm not super pumped about that. And I recognize it as a problem, and we're working on it. And, but by we, I mean me and Lauren. So
Right.
like this huge, big company team of all the people, like it's just us, me and my work wife, acknowledge this is a problem, and we're trying to be better. And so that would definitely be like one thing on social that we do need to do better on it, and we're just like constantly in the process of like trying to figure out how to do that. And that's really like one thing that kind of led to the inception of the magazine, is that we realized that there's this opportunity to celebrate diversity by opening up pages to a diverse set of contributors and talking about real issues. And that was actually something that we could do by removing ourselves at some level from snow sports specifically, opened up an opportunity for us to be able to create media and create images and create stories and create all these things about all these things that are important to us, because we've definitely felt a little bit locked in on the snow sports side.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought the magazine up again. One thing I like about it is how, it is so diverse, but at the same time, you're not like, again, it goes back to wanting a safe space for everybody, but at the same time, sort of being sad that it has to be that way. So I guess I really like that it is open, but also is not, I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway.
Well, I think, well, I think, well, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that maybe what you're saying is that like, sometimes you can get into this and you talk about the problems and you talk about different, like that's all that you talk about it, and it can feel like you can feel like a victim in the process of talking about it. And what our approach with the magazine is like we just have diverse contributors, and then they get to talk about the things they want to talk about. Right.
That is exactly it. And I have that with my podcast too, because I want to have a diverse group of guests, but at the same time, I don't want any time that I talk to a woman of color that it be about being a woman of color. I want it to be about their sport or whatever activity they're doing.
Exactly. So. And that's what we're doing with the magazine. So, if you look at our contributors, we're not going to women of color and saying, we want you to talk about being women of color. Right. We actually say, we got some pages. How many do you want? Okay. And then they talk about the things that they want to talk about, or they create the art that's important to them, or write the columns. And so, and we don't tone police. And we obviously like edit for, grammar and sentence structure and fact check and do all of that. But we kind of let people just like show up and put things on a page. And then we're not putting them into this box of like, oh, well, you're a Black woman, so you only get to talk about issues that are related to women or to people of color, or like, oh, you're trans, so you only get to talk about trans issues. Like people are more, people are multidimensional, and they have a lot of interests. And how we normalize all of these different things is that we just let them exist.
Right, exactly.
Rather than always having to like fully call it out, right?
Well, it shows in the magazine. It's really terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I noticed in the back of issue number 2, you talked about a future collaboration with Live Cycling. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So Live is an amazing group of human beings, and we were connected about a year ago, and just sort of became like professional like peers. We would talk about the industry and talk about what was happening with women, and then when the magazine came along, Live wanted to support us as female founders, as independent. Like I said, independent media source, and they asked how they could support our work. And so when, that's where sponsorship comes in, right? So, we had a little feature on them in this issue. They were in our marketplace, and then they are actually supporting a cycling trip that I'm doing next month in Nepal.
Wow.
And we'll be creating a lot of content from that trip in terms of like we're hiring a female guide to come along with us, and we'll be writing a story about her as like a Nepalese woman who's a cycling guide. And we'll be able, obviously be taking like gorgeous photos along the ride and talking about how, Julianne and Roz and I, like the three of us cycled in Africa last year together, and like what this trip means to us. And so, Liv is giving us an opportunity as three women to go to this beautiful place and have this outdoor experience, and really bring local women into the fold. And then that will be the primary content for our fall issue. And so, what I really appreciate about working with Liv is that they're not coming to us saying, you need to write about this, or we want these words to be used, or it's this angle, or we want this ad. Like, we actually are creating the content we would create anyways and saying what it is that we would say anyways. And we have a sponsor who believes in us, who says, okay, we'll put our money behind that. We're going to support that because we trust you and we believe in you, and you're creating something that's in line with our values too.
Nice. How have you been preparing for the trip?
Well, preparing for Nepal, it's been interesting. I'm cycling a lot now that winter is halfway gone. I've been able to get out on my bike a lot more, and so I'm trying to ride, I don't know, 3 to 4 times a week and about 30 to 50K for each ride. But a lot of preparing for Nepal is also just mentally setting myself up for the fact that I have no idea what we're actually getting ourselves into. I mean, we have a route and I've spoken to people about it, but I've never been there and we have no idea what actually to expect. So I'm trying to remind myself that sometimes sufferfests are good and I should just go with it. But but no, I'm cycling a lot. I'm trying to eat better. So like thinking about eating a lot of protein and other things that help my body build the muscle and just kind of get used to being back in the saddle, because that's really the biggest thing.
Right. How many miles do you expect to ride every day there?
Oh, the mileage will be really low. So we're looking at about 75K per day. The route that we're doing is only about 400 kilometers. So in comparison to cycling across Africa, it's like not a big deal in terms of the distance. The difference is that we're going to have at least one really significant mountain pass to summit that I believe is at about 13,000 feet. And, this is where the unknowns come in, is we're not really clear on the condition of that road. So we have no idea, is there any pavement? Is it dirt? And what is the condition of the dirt? And so that will likely be the most difficult part of the trip, is getting up and over that pass. And then, so I likely should start riding some hills around here.
Might help.
I've like this whole, like 200 meters of elevation gain that I've been rocking. I probably need to look at doing something a little bit more significant in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
And you said that you had a guide who's going to be there from Nepal, and what role is she going to take?
Well, a couple things. So part of it is just being, trying to be a good tourist, that you should support the local economy. And so hiring guides, even though we we know how to cycle and we know how to, fix our own tires and fix our bikes. And we have maps. Like part of it is just honoring locals and, like a way that they're able to make a living. So that's one reason why we're doing it. And then also we imagine that there could be some language barriers in some of the villages that we'll be staying, because we're not going to be packing tents and sleeping bags and cookware. We're going to be staying in the villages and sorting that out as we roll in to a village. And then also, the route finding will be incredibly important as well, because with a local guide, we should be able to get off some of the main roads and take some of the back roads through the villages. So those are, a couple of the main reasons why we're bringing a guide.
And you mentioned supporting the local economy. I was going to ask you about food. So you're going to get all your food there, I gather.
Yeah, so likely the only food that we'll be bringing over will be snacks like energy bars, recovery mix, instant coffee. I've been told that I better do that, or else I will not be having coffee in the morning. But then we're going to eat all of our meals on the road, just village to village.
I get very nervous about having enough food, so I would want to bring something. I think just for emergencies. I think.
Yeah, no, you can't. We've learned that you absolutely need to carry snacks. Like you need to have a couple snacks in your pack in case you get, really low energy and you're not near a place where you can buy food. But based on the map, it looks like we should be hitting villages. And the other thing that we might do too is, obviously, like if we're in a village and don't think that we'll be going through one, say for lunch or something, we'll just buy something and carry it with us for the day. But yeah, we'll be definitely just eating whatever is available day to day.
That's exciting though. Cool.
It is exciting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm also trying to ignore all the things that scare me right now. So
what scares you?
I think the unknown. Like I'm so comfortable in Africa. Like I know Africa so well. Even yesterday. So I bought my plane ticket yesterday. We leave in a month. I bought my plane ticket. I couldn't get myself to buy the plane ticket because I'm like, I don't understand. Like, I don't know what the visa requirements are, and I need to look at that. And what's the airport like, and what's the all these different things that shouldn't really be a big deal, but it just was this sticking point. And so I bought my plane ticket, but now, I think summiting, getting up and over that mountain pass is definitely intimidating. It's going to be really, really difficult. Not understanding the level of traffic. And even though I'm communicating with a lot of local people and they just say, oh, it's difficult. And I'm like, well, difficult compared to what? Like, is it more, is there more traffic than cycling through Lusaka, the capital of Zambia, for example? Like, is it worse than that or not? I don't know. So just not really knowing what it is that we're getting ourselves into, because we don't really have anything to compare it to. We just have people telling us that it's hard, but hard in comparison to what, right? Like, of course it's hard. We're riding our bikes through Nepal. Yeah, we know it's hard, but how hard and what is hard and what can we expect? So just a lot of those little things that I'm kind of ignoring for the time being.
Yeah. I sort of like doing unknown things because it does put you in that position of not knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, like we're not booking any lodging. We just are going to cycle. And when we're done cycling for that day, we're going to find a place to sleep. So there are certain things like that I think once we get there and we're in it, it's going to be really fun. And just, so much of this is just about starting, because you build up this story in your head of what it may or may not be. But once we get there, and that day that we put everything on our bikes and we leave, like once you start, everything kind of settles in. And I need to keep reminding myself about that, because it's true with so many different things that you do.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Oh my God, like you want to talk about climate change? It's real. What else?
I don't know. We have a leader who says it's not.
It is. It's real. I don't know. I'm also like looking at buying a new iPhone because I want a better camera for Nepal. Yeah.
I'm scared to buy a new iPhone. I like my iPhone.
What are you scared about?
I just don't need $1,000 phone.
I know. Well, see, I don't want to spend $1,000 on phone. I actually need a better camera. The new phones have the double lens, and this is kind of like about my like professionally. I need to be able to take better photos, and to have an iPhone means that I don't actually have to have a full camera that I don't actually know how to use. So that's what I like. That's what I'm
I know.
struggling with.
I started carrying a good camera that's actually a camera, not a phone, and the photos are so much better than the camera.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when
Yeah.
I'm wanting to take photos, I use that
Yeah.
and stick with
Yeah.
my crappy phone.
Yeah. I don't know. I just like one thing in the pocket. That's it. Everywhere I go.
I hear you.
So, yeah. And it fits perfectly into my mountain bike, like into my cycling shorts. So I'm a cyclist too. So last year I cycled across the continent of Africa. And then now we're, doing this trip in Nepal. And I do wear spandex, but I wear it like under like a button down cotton shirt and mountain bike shorts. Cause I don't know. I've never like really gotten into like the road cycling thing, even though I do it now, but my mountain bike shorts have a pocket that perfectly fits my phone. And so I can actually be on my bike cycling, taking photos with one hand and video. Don't tell my mother that I'm saying this because she already is like mortified that I'm cycling in these places. But yeah, I do it like one handed and like pull my phone out and take photos and video. And it's really fun. So the iPhone fits. Yeah.
Hey, I know what I would like to talk to you about a little bit is getting more girls out in the outdoors and sticking with it past the age of, I don't know, 10 and 14 or something like that.
Yeah. I spent my 20s and my early 30s actually working in outdoor ed. So, like on the nonprofit side, and we worked with underserved communities. And so there were lots of different barriers for these people to get into the outdoors. So I have a lot of experience with that. And I think that, whether they're girls or they're, any other sort of underrepresented group, there's, one thing to consider is you can't be what you can't see.
I know.
So how do we get little girls to want to grow up to be, guides or rock climbers or skiers or, if they're not seeing them as role models? And so while you can go to a crag or go to a mountain and see a lot of women out there, like media and just these images that we consume have not caught up with the reality of these experiences. And so we need to see more women, more people of color, like who are actually in the media and in these public spaces so that people can see and like have role models and think to themselves, like, I want to grow up to be like that. I think that's definitely getting better. And even like Instagram is this perfect tool for that because anybody can really create there. So I think that's part of it. Obviously, like the high cost of a lot of these sports is a barrier to entry. And one of the things that we need to do is really sort of reconceptualize what it means to be an outdoor enthusiast, what it means to recreate in the outdoors. Like going for a walk, you're outside. You are outside. That's being in the outdoors. Like you don't have to summit a 14,000 foot peak. You don't have to own $5,000 in gear, right? And I think that this is kind of a big challenge for the industry is to understand once again like how this narrative of what it means to be in the outdoors has limited people's participation from a financial barrier to entry to intimidation to like literally not having the knowledge on where to go because that knowledge there's gatekeepers who hold it, which is a whole interesting conversation around like geotagging and things like that. But I think that like having people as role models that young women can see, and then also looking at like, well, how do we define outdoor experiences are two things that could help keep young women in the outdoors.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with you. That's one thing that I've learned in the podcast is everybody I've talked to has that one person that's told them that they can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jen, for being on the podcast. I really look forward to hearing about Nepal and also reading the next issue of Sisu. So thank you. Your work is really motivating.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
Sure. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay, have a good one. Bye.
Bye. Thanks to Jen Gurecki for being on the show, and thanks to you for listening. Head to hearhersports.com to find links to CZU Magazine, Coalition Snow, and many of the other things we talked about. Hear Her Sports is focused on increasing listenership in 2019, so please tell your friends about the podcast or about one interesting little tidbit you learned to get them excited. Every week I learn something wonderful talking to these great athletes, so I hope you do as well. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, subscribe to the Hear Her Sports newsletter, or donate on hearhersports.com. Our theme music is by the band Goldmines, our logo by Agnes Studio. And keep listening. I'll be back in 2 weeks.
And there's still like so much more room for growth. There's still like, even our company, like we're not the answer to it all. Like we're like moving things in the right direction, but there's a ton of work that can be done around it.
Yeah.
In all different sports. Absolutely.
Whether you are a brand new runner or you've been running for years, there is always a new way that running can change your life. And this is what the Planted Runner is all about. Being planted also means you're ready for growth. You can start exactly where you are right now and get better. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and I've coached hundreds of runners of all ages and abilities with science-backed training, nutrition, and mental strength techniques. And on the Planted Runner podcast, I'll share it all with you. You can be a better runner at any age. I'll show you how.